Hi, this is Craig the Pool Man with Pool Specialist. Today we have a video on how to replace the heat exchanger. Before we get to that, I would like to point out a few things that you should be aware of as far as a good installation goes on a heater. First of all, let's talk about the gas line. If you notice down here, the way the gas goes is any dirt is going to wind up in this trap. So therefore the gas comes in here, it's going to hit this T, it's going to go down, and it's going to fall into that, and it'll stay out of this regulator, which goes to one heater, and then of course this regulator, which goes to this heater. So that is the proper way to do that. Another very important thing on installing a heater, because guess what? It is going to fail and you are going to have to take it out, replace it, fix it, or whatever. So very important that you put a union right on the end of the heater. So you can use an 8-inch pipe, 3/4 inch, 8-inch, 3/4 by 8-inch pipe that goes into the gas valve, and then put a union right here. Also, you'll notice this grommet or protector, and that is to take up any space that mice or rodents could actually get into this heater and chew up the wires. So you want to make sure you have a union here, you have this grommet here to prevent mice and rodents from getting in, and that's for your gas side. On your other side, you should have a bypass, and this bypass should consist of a 3-way valve, and then that's going to go over to a T, and then behind this T, coming straight out of the heater, you have a check valve. So that is the correct way. Some people put a valve here as well. That's not a good idea, because if you actually close the two valves, you could pressurize this heater, it'll start up, it'll run, it'll overheat, it'll kick out in the high limits, it'll do that again and again and again, and it'll eventually destroy the heater. It could actually blow it apart. So this is the proper way to do a bypass on it. So if we want to bypass this, we're simply going to take this and we're going to close it off to the heater. And so now we have no water going to the heater, so we can continue to run our pumps and everything else going on and not have to worry about the water coming into the heater, because we're going to have to take this heater out of here in reality. Okay, so what I've done is, of course, to make things a little bit quicker on this video, is there's 4 screws. 1, 2, 3, 4. We went ahead and we have removed them. So this panel will come off very easily, and then we will set it aside. There's a panel on the other side, and same thing, there's 4 screws, 1, 2, 3, 4, can't see them. They have been removed, and now I can just pick that panel up and take that off. Then this whole top piece comes off, and there are wing nuts. So there's a wing nut here, a wing nut here, a wing nut here, and a wing nut there. And once you remove those wing nuts, then this will lift off rather easily, as you can see. And then we're going to take this completely off so that it's out of our way. To remove this top, of course, you want to make sure that before you start this process, you shut off your power to the heater, and then also shut off your gas to the heater, because we're going to have to remove that gas line. So we take this off, and I'm going to flip this around, and you're going to see there's a bunch of wires. Pentair's done a really good job of making it, as I call, as idiot proof as possible, because that is only going to fit on that. This one's only going to fit on that one. This one only fits on this one. Same goes here, here, and finally the last one. So now I have my whole top piece, and I can now set that aside in a safe place so that it does not get damaged. What you're going to want to do, of course we have it bypassed, is you're going to want a pair of their oil filter pliers, but I tend to like the channel lock ones. These happen to be part number 215 in channel lock. I'm sure you can get them on Amazon. And we're just going to then undo these unions. We now have that disconnected from the heater. Okay, so now, of course, we want to make this top piece so that it can come off without any restrictions. So what I recommend, so that you remember where things go, is you go ahead and take your phone and you take a picture of the wires and how they're attached to the sensors so that you have the right color wires going to the right sensors. There is a water flow sensor here, then you have a high limit there, and then on this side you have the AGS and the temperature sensor, which temperature sensor is on the top, the AGS is on the bottom. So those all have to get removed. Also, of course, the wiring that comes in to the heater is going to have to get removed, and that is relatively easy if it was done correctly. What you would do is, there is a 1/4 inch hex screw that holds the plate on, so you're going to remove that, and then once you remove that, you can slide the plate off and you can disconnect your wires. In this case, I have a hot, a neutral, and a ground. The hot, of course, is black to black, and then the neutral, which comes in as white, is going to be connected to the red wire. You always want to make sure that that is the way if you're wired for 120 volts. If you're wired for 240, it just doesn't matter. So there we go, we remove that. I go ahead and put these wire nuts back on. And then our ground wire. And then the last but not least is there is a bonding wire that goes to the bonding lug out here. So you have two options. You could remove it from here, or you could remove it from here. This is more of a pain in the neck because the bonding wire is attached. So again, you're going to take your 1/4 inch nut driver, I'm sorry, it's a 5/16 inch nut driver, and you're going to remove that screw and pull that wire off, and now we have the wires free on this side, and we're down to removing the nuts and the gas line. Okay, so now we're going to remove our gas line, and of course I have a union here. Any of your good installers are going to put a union there, and the best way, make sure you have your gas shut off, and then I like to use an adjustable wrench to hold that, and then we're going to use a pipe wrench, and we're going to remove that union. And we can swing that out of the way, not that big of a deal. Now the other thing is you're going to have to remove this pipe, because we're going to pick this whole unit up, and that whole unit, if we had the pipe there, is going to get in the way of removing that unit. So go ahead and take your pipe wrench and you can remove the pipe from the gas valve. It should not be killer tight. If whoever put it in killer tight, you're going to have to take a pair of channel locks and hold your gas valve with it. The other thing is, as I get to the gas valve, when I install these, I like to use the gas approved Teflon tape. As you can see, I don't like to use pipe dope here, mainly because if you put too much pipe dope, then that pipe dope can actually get into the gas valve and gum it up and cause failure. So if you look at this, I've got a natural gas, propane gas approved Teflon tape on this side and also on this side. That way I've eliminated any of pipe dope from actually getting in there. So now that I've got this removed, we can go ahead and we can remove the nuts around the top of the drum. And this is a newer drum and it has a bunch of nuts around the top. We're going to go ahead and remove all those. It's a regular 7/16 inch wrench, and we're not going to bore you with removing them all. We're just going to show you a few of them, and be aware that, of course, this isn't going to go anywhere until they're all removed. Now, the older ones actually have what's called a belly band. So there was a band that went around the top that held the top to the bottom, but they haven't done those probably for, I'm going to say, close to 6-7 years. So the likelihood of you running into that is slim, but be aware that it would come apart by taking the band off. So we're going to remove these nuts and then we're going to get right back to you. All right, we're back. So we have removed all of the nuts around the top and it's now loose. I tend to put all my stuff down here in these nice little pockets in the feet. That way they don't get lost or misplaced or fall off or whatever. So the one thing is, there is a stainless steel plate right here, and that is screwed into this back plate. That is a 1/4 inch screw. You are going to have to remove that screw so that this can slide out of place. You can see that all my wires to all my sensors have been removed on both sides. I even removed the automation wire. Now, of course, this is kind of tight, so as in the top, there's wing nuts on the bottom as well. And so my recommendation is go ahead and remove those wing nuts on the bottom. This way, this panel is free to move however you need it to move in order to get this out. Now, when you lift this out, be very careful because there is a fire block underneath here, and we're going to have to remove these screws as well. I forgot about that. So there are 2 screws, one here, they're 1/2 inch. And don't lose your little rubber piece that goes in between them. You'll be very unhappy if you do. Now this will come back out and we can gently remove this top piece. And this is the fire block. That's not a good thing that it's busted. This is going to have to get replaced. Alright, now that we've got the top off and we've set it off to the side, we're going to go ahead and swing this so that you can see what we're doing. And I had removed the screws from here. There's 3 screws, and then this just lifts out of place, and then you've got your next piece, and that of course is for rodents, to try to keep them out. So don't forget to put that back in. You definitely want to keep the rodents out of these heaters, because boy, they love to chew on the wires, and that can get very expensive. So now you can see there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 of these bolts, and we're going to go ahead and we're going to remove all those bolts. So we're going to remove all these bolts, and just a trick, this bottom bolt, either side, it doesn't really matter. Let's just say that you weren't sure whether the heater core was breached and you have water in the tank. You could actually remove this bolt, this one or the one on the other side, and when you pull it out, if there is water in that heat exchanger tank, that water would then come back out. Now, really important is when you put these back in, I strongly recommend that you go ahead and you get yourself some anti-seize that you would buy at the automotive store. They actually invented it for spark plugs because dissimilar metal between the head and the spark plug, and you put anti-seize on these so that if you ever have to change this again, these do not get seized up, because this is a grade 8 bolt and we're threaded into just regular steel. Yes, it's not dissimilar, but because of the moisture and everything going on, you tend to get a lot of rust. So we're going to go ahead and remove the rest of these bolts, and then we're going to go on and show you what's going on. But first, before we remove them all, we're going to go ahead and remove our thermal regulator. To remove the thermal regulator, get yourself just a regular number 2 Phillips head, and you would go ahead and put it in the castle. It's a castle nut, and just unscrew it. There's quite a bit of tension here because there's a spring that holds that thermal regulator in. I like to remove this, that way when I take the manifold off, I don't have the issues of the pressure of that spring. So it's an extra step, but it's really well worth the time. And then quite honestly, you can inspect that thermal regulator to make sure that there's no issues with the thermal regulator. So we're going to pull this out, and you can clearly see that there is absolutely no corrosion on this whatsoever. So this is functioning correct. You could put it in boiling water and verify that it opens up. Same thing you would do for a thermal regulator for a car. Many of you that have fixed old cars know that you have a thermal regulator in it so that the engine heats up to a temperature before the fluid starts flowing through the radiator. That way the engine runs a little bit more efficient, and quite honestly, it has better reliability as well. So same thing with this heater. This is an important thing. You want this thermal regulator to regulate the temperature of the water inside the heater core, because if that drops, then you're going to lose efficiency. And the other thing is you're going to soot it up a whole lot quicker. So definitely keep your thermal regulator in there. So we're going to pause, and we'll be back once we have all of the nuts removed. Alright, all our bolts have been removed, and so now we're just going to take off our header, and you can see everything's nice and clean. We're going to go ahead and we're going to get these rubber gaskets off and use them on the new exchanger in this case. So at this point the exchanger will just lift out. We're going to take our fire block out very carefully as to not destroy it. And you can see that all the soot on top of it. So be careful not to break this. We're going to have to put this back and use it. And now we have our empty heat exchanger tank. So we're going to go ahead and clean this out, and we're going to put our new heat exchanger in. So we'll be back in a minute to show you how we're going to actually put this all back together. All right, we're going to now put this heater back together, and we want to make sure that we have our bottom fire block. This is the old one. It's still in good shape. I'm not too worried about it. I like to draw a circle using the top one to show where the extra foam piece is going to go on the bottom. And then the top one, of course, has a little hole in it where the igniter goes. So this is definitely the bottom piece. You want to put this so that this little lip is on the bottom and this is on the top. And so at that point, you are going to take your heat exchanger, and your heat exchanger is now going to get lifted in. The metal plates go on the bottom, and so carefully, so that you don't damage your fire block, lift this into place. You want to make sure that that fire block is as far forward as possible. You can see that I went ahead and I put my O-rings on all of my inputs, and now I'm going to actually, once you set this in, your next step is to put your header on. So we take our header, and of course we're going to put it on over this, and now we're going to take our anti-seize, and we're going to go ahead and put some anti-seize on the threads of each one of these bolts as they go in. This will prevent it from seizing up in the future if you have to change this heat exchanger or take the header off or do something of that nature. This will save a lot of headaches. So very important is you always thread things in with your fingers so that they're not cross-threaded. Once you have several threads, you can go ahead and tighten it up with a ratchet. I'm going to put in 2 of these, and then I'll fast forward and put them all in and bring you back once all of these are then threaded in. I'm a real big believer in the anti-seize. As you notice, I have a big bottle of it. I actually also use it on the bolts when I'm putting pumps together. A lot of times you've got stainless steel pumps, and you have aluminum bodies, aluminum threads, which are dissimilar metals, and so therefore you're going to get a galvanic reaction, and presto bingo, they seize together and you can't get them apart because they're literally welded. So we're going to go ahead and just make these barely hand tight just to get them all in. Okay, now that they're all hand tight, I'm going to treat this like I would either a head gas or a head on an engine or an intake manifold on an engine, and I'm going to tighten it a little bit at a time. I'm going to start from the center bolts, and then I'm going to go across and tighten from the inside out. And again, I don't have a whole lot of pressure on this. I'm just tightening it a little bit at a time. Okay, so then they're kind of snug, and now I'm going to go back and tighten them just a little bit more using the exact same procedure. And the reason I'm doing this is to compress those O-rings that go on the actual heater core or the heater coil, and I want this to be snug and all these bolts torqued to about the same tension. Now, there is no real torque specification for this, but you want it to be snug. You don't want it to be killer tight. And if you ease into it, then by the time you're done, all of your bolts will be tightened consistently, and your I/O header will seat, and hopefully you won't have any leaks when you fire this up. And I know this may seem excessive, but I just like to make sure that they're all tight together at about the same torque. If you really want to go crazy, you could get yourself a torque wrench and you could actually do it that way. Then the next thing we're going to do is we're going to put in our thermal regulator, and this tends to be a little bit of a challenge sometimes because you get the spring, and so you seat this in here, and you can feel it seat all the way in, and then you put your castle nut on it, and you kind of have to put pressure and hand thread it till it catches. And then once it catches, take just a number 2 Phillips head and tighten it up. Now, if you look at this top nut, plug, whatever you want to call it, you'll notice that the O-ring is on the inside of the thread. Not on the top, but the inside of the thread. So the reality is you do not have to really tighten this very tight for it to seal. So don't kill it, because you are going to have to take that out again, because they are going to corrode. They are replaceable. Typically Pentair recommends that you replace the thermal regulator, the high limit, and the AGS every 2 to 3 years, depending on how much you actually use the heater. So now we're going to slide the heater back in place, and we're going to connect it up and put some water in it and hope that it doesn't leak. Okay, now we're going to take this heater, we're going to rotate it back. Be very careful with your O-rings on your unions, because they tend to like to fall off. I'm not enthralled with the way that these things fit, to be honest. And they can cause you all types of heartache if they fall out, as you can see. And again, very, very important that you tighten these up, thread them by hand. And they say hand tight, although I tend to like to give a little bit of a snug with some channel locks. Again, I don't kill it, but I don't want it to leak. And also, if they're not tight enough, the gasket or that O-ring can actually push out, and then you have to remove both of them, put the O-ring back in place, and then retighten them. So we have that going. Now we have our, we're going to open up our bypass. And there we go. Everything looks good. From what I can tell, we don't have any leaks on the outside. We don't have any leaks on the inside. So our next step is going to be to start putting the heat exchanger back together. All right, so now we're going to put the rest of the heat exchanger together. Of course, we have our little button that goes down here, and we actually drew a circle so that we know exactly where it is. And now we have this lip on the top piece, which is our fire block, and we want to make sure don't lose that lip, because if it cracks off, what's going to happen is the heat will get out to this I/O header, and then it will melt it and it'll start to leak. And then you'll have to take this whole thing apart, put new fire blocks in, and start again. So be very cautious of that. All right, next we're going to take the whole heater portion of it, and we are going to very carefully lift this into place. All right, so now we're going to go ahead and continue to put the nuts back on top and start assembling this whole thing together. So I'm not going to bore you with putting the nuts on top or putting this back door together. We're going to go ahead and do that, and then we'll get back and do some more video. So as you can see, we're basically out of light at this point. So I'm going to put on a headlamp and finish this job up so that I could get it done tonight. But we have our nuts back on. All we have to do is hook our wires back up. You should have taken pictures of all your wires so you know where everything goes. And then it's pretty simple from this point forward. Just look at the beginning of the video and the way you took it apart. Use those steps and put it back together in the exact same order, and fire it up, and it should work. Going to have another video on how to test the gas pressure going into the gas valve, and then also test the pressure coming out of the gas valve, which is right here. And that is what we're going to worry about, because in this case this heater sooted up, so this gas pressure right here, which is a negative pressure, is either too high or too low, causing the flame to be either too rich or too lean. So hope you found this video educational. If you did, give us a thumbs up, follow us if you will, and thank you so much for watching, and have a great day.